On the sun-baked afternoon in rural Pennsylvania, Thomas Miller's rusty shovel struck something that wasn't dirt. For 40 years he had worked this land, knowing every inch of soil like the lines on his weathered hands. But this was different. What emerged from the earth that day wasn't just ancient metal and stone. It was a door to a forgotten world, a relic worth millions that would turn his quiet farm into a battleground of history and greed. As word spread, dark figures began appearing at the edge of his property, their intentions as shadowy as their origins. What Thomas didn't know was that his discovery wasn't just valuable, it was dangerous. Could this simple farmer protect a secret that powerful men had killed to keep buried for centuries? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thomas Miller's morning ritual hadn't changed in 40 years. Each day began before dawn, his weathered hands wrapping around a steaming mug of black coffee as he sat at the ancient oak table his father had built. The leather-bound journal beside him, another inheritance from his father, lay open to a fresh page waiting for the day's observations. Its worn pages held decades of rainfall measurements, crop rotations, and the quiet poetry of a farmer's life. This morning, though, his pen hesitated above the blank page. How could mere words capture what had happened yesterday? The pendant still lay wrapped in his old flannel shirt, tucked away in the bedroom dresser. He'd spent half the night staring at it, tracing the strange symbols with trembling fingers, wondering why his heart raced every time he touched it. The familiar rumble of tires on gravel drew his attention. Through the kitchen window, he watched. His daughter's Subaru pull up, Sarah's city-polished presence somehow both comforting and unsettling. She stepped out, her museum curator's badge catching the morning light, her practical boots a concession to the farm's muddy paths. "Dad?" Sarah's voice carried the slight edge it had held since her mother's passing 3 years ago, a mixture of concern and determination. "I came as soon as I got your message. What's so urgent it couldn't wait for Sunday dinner?" Thomas rose slowly, his joints protesting the damp spring morning. "Better show you than tell you, honey." He grabbed the journal, an inexplicable urge, compelling him to document whatever came next. As they climbed the stairs, a movement caught his eye through the window. A black SUV with tinted windows, crawling past the farm's entrance for the third time that morning. His hand tightened on the banister. Sarah noticed his tension. "Dad, what is it?" Probably nothing, but his voice betrayed him. 40 years of farming had taught him to trust his instincts about approaching storms. In the bedroom, he carefully unwrapped the flannel shirt. Sarah's sharp intake of breath told him he hadn't been imagining things. The pendant seemed to glow. In the morning light, its bronze surface etched with patterns that shouldn't have survived centuries underground. "Dad, this is..." Sarah's curator training took over as she reached for her phone. "We need to document everything. Where exactly did you find it? Was there anything else? Have you cleaned it?" "Whoa, now, slow down." Thomas held up his hand. "I haven't touched it beyond getting it out of the ground. Found it up in the north field, near the old oak grove. Was checking the drainage after all that rain we had." Sarah's fingers flew across her phone's screen. "I'm calling Marcus Chen. He's the leading expert on medieval European artifacts at the museum." "Dad, if this is what I think it is..." A sharp knock at the front door cut her off. Thomas felt his shoulders tense. Through the bedroom window, he could see the black SUV now parked at the end of his driveway. "Mr. Miller?" a voice called from below. "This is Sheriff Cooper. Need to have a word with you." Sarah's eyes met his, and in that moment, Thomas saw his own unease reflected there. The journal in his hand suddenly felt like a tether to simpler times, when his biggest worry was whether rain would spoil the hay harvest. "Coming," he called down, carefully rewrapping the pendant. "Sarah, whatever this is, I made a promise to your mother to keep this farm safe, to keep our family's legacy intact." His daughter's expression softened. "I know, Dad. We'll figure this out together." But as they descended the stairs, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he'd unearthed more than just an ancient artifact. He'd dug up something that was about to change everything, and not everyone coming to his farm would be interested in preserving history. The sheriff's silhouette darkened the front door's frosted glass, and behind him, Thomas could make out other shapes moving at the edge of his property. His father's journal weighed heavy in his hand, and he found himself wishing he could write. His way back to yesterday, back to when his biggest concern was the approaching spring planting. But time, like the soil he'd worked all his life, only moved in one direction. And whatever lay ahead, he had a feeling it would fill many pages in this journal, assuming he lived long enough to write them. Sheriff Cooper's warning about treasure hunters had barely faded from the morning air when Dr. Marcus Chen's Mercedes wound up the gravel driveway. The archaeologist emerged with the precise movements of someone used to handling fragile things, his silver-rimmed glasses catching the midday sun. Sarah greeted him with the easy familiarity of long-time colleagues. "Marcus, thank you for coming so quickly. When you mentioned possible medieval European artifacts in Pennsylvania," he smiled, adjusting his leather briefcase. "Well, let's just say I rearranged my schedule." Thomas watched as Dr. Chen laid out his tools on the kitchen table. Delicate brushes, digital calipers, a high-resolution camera, and what looked like a portable X-ray device. The authentication report form beside them was headed with the Philadelphia Museum of Natural History's letterhead. "Mr. Miller," Dr. Chen said, pulling on white cotton gloves. "Could you show me exactly where you found the pendant?" The north field looked different now, somehow charged with possibility. Thomas pointed to the spot near the old oak's twisted roots. "Was checking the drainage here. Shovel hit something solid." Dr. Chen knelt, his knees cracking slightly. "These oaks, they're old, very old." His fingers sifted through the soil with practiced precision. "The ground here has been undisturbed for centuries." He paused, pulling out a small metal detector. "Mr. Miller, would you mind if I—" The device whined to life, and within minutes they had another find, a small bronze coin, green with age. "Extraordinary," Dr. Chen breathed, studying it through a loupe. "This is consistent with late 13th century European minting. The pendant, please?" When Thomas unwrapped the flannel shirt, the artifact seemed to pulse in the sunlight. Dr. Chen's usual professional detachment slipped for just a moment, his eyes widening behind his glasses. "This craftsmanship, these symbols." His gloved fingers traced the patterns reverently. "Sarah, look at the inlay work. Have you ever seen anything like it?" She leaned in, her curator's training evident in her careful movements. "Marcus, is that—" "Yes, Germanic runic script, but combined with something else, something older." He looked up at Thomas. "Mr. Miller, what you found here, it's not just historically significant. Based on preliminary assessment, the materials alone, the gold inlay, the craftsmanship, we're looking at a value of at least $3 million. Thomas felt the earth shift under his feet. Sarah steadied him with a hand on his arm. "But its historical value?" Dr. Chen continued, his voice thick with excitement. "That's incalculable. This could rewrite our understanding of medieval European presence in North America." The whine of the metal detector cut through the moment. Dr. Chen's assistant had continued scanning the area. "Dr. Chen, over here!" As they hurried over, a glint of metal revealed itself in the freshly turned soil. Dr. Chen's camera clicked rapidly, documenting everything before they dared to excavate further. "This site needs to be properly protected," he said, straightening up. "I'll make some calls. Get an emergency archaeological team out here. Mr. Miller, your farm may be sitting on one of the most significant historical discoveries of the decade." Thomas looked at his land, the same fields he'd plowed for 40 years, and felt a chill despite the warm spring sun. He'd seen the way Dr. Chen's hands had trembled slightly when examining the pendant, noticed the barely contained excitement. In his voice, whatever they'd found, it was big, maybe too big. Sarah squeezed his arm. "Dad, this is amazing." Think of what this means for historical research, for understanding our past. But Thomas was thinking of the black SUV from this morning, of Sheriff Cooper's warnings. He was thinking of his father's stories about the land, passed down through generations, about things better left buried. Dr. Chen was already on his phone, his voice carried on the breeze. Yes, priority authentication, full security detail. No, you don't understand. This is unprecedented. The sun dipped behind a cloud, and for a moment the shadows of the old oak trees seemed to reach for them like grasping fingers. Thomas pulled his father's journal from his pocket, noting the date. Something told him that years from now, this would be the day his children and grandchildren would read about, the day everything changed. And, not necessarily for the better, the newspaper arrived 3 days later, and Thomas's heart sank when he saw the headline, "Local Farmer Unearths Medieval Treasure." Someone at the museum had leaked the story. The photo showed his farm from above, probably taken by a drone, with the north field circled in red. Sarah had already called twice this morning, apologizing for the breach. He spread the paper across the kitchen table, next to a stack of others he'd been collecting. Each headline seemed more sensational than the last. European artifacts found. In Pear Farm, $1 million mystery in Miller's Field, 3 medieval discovery rocks historical community. The sound of tires on gravel drew his attention. Another unfamiliar vehicle, the fourth this morning, this time a sleek European sedan with rental car plates. The man who emerged wore an expensive suit that seemed deliberately casual, his shoes worth more than Thomas's monthly grain shipment. "Mr. Miller." The man's accent was slight but distinct. "My name is Victor Kovac. I represent certain private collectors who are very interested in your discovery." Before Thomas could respond, a familiar voice cut through the morning air. "The property's closed to visitors." Sheriff Cooper emerged from his patrol car, his hand resting casually on his holster. "Mr. Kovac, I believe we discussed this yesterday at your hotel." Kovac's smile didn't waver. "Of course, Sheriff. Just making a courtesy call." He placed a business card on the fence post. "When you're ready to discuss a private sale, Mr. Miller, please call. Our offer will be substantially more generous than any museums." Thomas watched them leave, then retrieved the card with trembling fingers. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind that spoke of old money and quiet power. He added it to his growing collection of evidence. Threatening. Letters, business cards, newspaper clippings, all carefully preserved in a folder marked "Unwanted Attention." Inside, the phone was ringing again. Sarah's voice was tense when he answered. "Dad, someone tried to break into my office last night. They went through all my files about the discovery." Thomas sank into his chair. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, but..." "Dad, these people aren't just treasure hunters. The security footage shows professionals. They knew exactly what they were looking for." A knock at the door made him jump. Through the window, he saw Dr. Chen's assistant, looking nervous. "Mr. Miller, Dr. Chen sent me to upgrade the security cameras. He says not to trust anyone who isn't cleared by the museum's security team." The morning sun caught something metallic in the young man's hand. Not tools, but a camera with a long lens. Thomas's finger hovered over the emergency number, Sheriff. Cooper had given him. "Dad," Sarah was still on the line, "the Historical Society is offering to help protect the site. They have experience with this kind of situation." Thomas watched as the assistant snapped photos of his property. "Honey, I don't think anyone has experience with exactly this kind of situation." He thought of the pendant, now locked away in the museum's vault, and the way it had seemed to warm to his touch, the way the symbols had almost seemed to shift when he looked at them too long. The dreams he'd been having since its discovery, of ancient voices, speaking words he almost understood. Another car was approaching, this one bearing the logo of a national news network. Thomas closed the curtains and added another entry to his folder of unwanted attention. The paper was filling up faster than any harvest record he'd ever kept. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I think it's time we talked about what your mother told me before she died, about the real history of this land and why our family has kept it for 7 generations." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with understanding. Outside, more cars were arriving, drawn to his quiet farm like moths to a flame. But it wasn't treasure they were going to find here. Some secrets, Thomas knew, were buried for a reason. And his family had been their guardians long before any museum took an interest in what lay beneath these fields. Dr. Chen's laboratory at the Philadelphia Museum of Natural History hummed with expensive equipment. Thomas watched through protective glass as the pendant underwent yet another scan, this time under a machine that looked more suited to a hospital than a museum. "There," Sarah whispered, pointing to the high-resolution display. "Do you see it, Marcus?" Dr. Chen adjusted his glasses, leaning closer to the screen. "Impossible. The metallurgical analysis didn't show any seams or joints, but this—" His fingers traced the outline of what appeared to be a hidden compartment within the pendants. "Bronze casing. Can we open it?" Thomas asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Not here." Dr. Chen's reply was immediate. "We need a controlled environment. The contents could be extremely fragile." He paused, studying Thomas's expression. "But given the circumstances, perhaps we should expedite the process." That night, under careful supervision, they gathered in the museum's restoration room. The pendant lay on a padded surface beneath powerful lights, looking deceptively ordinary despite its extraordinary value. Dr. Chen worked with methodical precision, his tools delicate as surgical instruments. The compartment opened with a soft click that seemed to echo in the quiet room. Inside, folded impossibly small, was a piece of parchment covered in faded markings. "My God," Dr. Chen breathed, carefully extracting it with micro-forceps. "The preservation is remarkable. The compartment must have been hermetically sealed." As they watched, he gently unfolded the ancient document. The map, for that's what it clearly was, showed a landscape Thomas knew intimately, his farm, the surrounding hills, but marked with symbols that made his head ache when he looked at them too long. "These markings," Sarah said, her curators, training evident in her steady voice. "They're similar to the ones on the pendant," but she trailed off, her finger hovering over a particular symbol. "Different," Dr. Chen finished. "Older, much older." He began photographing everything, his camera clicking rapidly. "This changes everything we thought we knew about medieval European contact with—" The lights went out. In the sudden darkness, Thomas felt rather than saw the pendant grow warm. The symbols on both pendant and map seemed to emit a faint, impossible glow. His recent dreams came rushing back, ancient voices, hidden paths, warnings passed down through generations. The emergency lights kicked in, casting everything in. An eerie blue glow. Dr. Chen was already calling security, but Thomas couldn't take his eyes off the map. One symbol in particular seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. It marked a spot on his farm he'd always avoided, a place his father had warned him about, where nothing would grow. "We need to move everything to the secure vault," Dr. Chen was saying. "Now." But as they carefully packed up their discoveries, Thomas noticed something that made his blood run cold. The map's markings were changing, ever so slightly, as if responding to some unseen influence. By the time they reached the vault, he knew with certainty that the photographs Dr. Chen had taken would show something quite different from what they'd originally seen. Later that night, lying awake in his hotel room, Thomas pulled out his father's, a journal. On the last page his father had written in, there was a single symbol, one that matched exactly what he'd seen on the map. Below it, in his father's shaky hand, were words that finally made sense. "The land remembers. The markers change. Trust only what the blood knows." Thomas touched the spot on his palm where the pendant had rested. It still tingled, as if awakening something long dormant in his veins. Tomorrow they would return to the farm with their scientific instruments and academic theories. But tonight, in the quiet dark, he knew they were all missing the true meaning of their discovery. Some maps, he was beginning to understand, weren't meant to be followed by just anyone. And some treasures were. Never meant to be found at all. Victor Kovac's business card sat on Thomas's kitchen table like a spider in the center of a web. Around it, Thomas had arranged the growing collection of evidence about the man, newspaper clippings mentioning his acquisitions of historical artifacts, printouts from Sarah's museum database, and a disturbing police report from Prague that Sheriff Cooper had quietly shared. The card itself was a masterpiece of understated wealth, cream-colored stock, black embossed lettering, a phone number with a Swiss country code. No title, no company name. Just Victor Kovac, and a simple geometric symbol that reminded Thomas uncomfortably of one of the markings on the ancient map. "You should hear him out," Dr. Chen said, surprising everyone. They'd gathered in Thomas's kitchen, Sarah, Dr. Chen, Sheriff Cooper, and Thomas, to discuss their options. Not because we should accept, but because whatever he says might tell us what we're really dealing with. Sarah set down her coffee cup too hard. "Marcus, you can't be serious. After what we found in the background check—" "Exactly," Dr. Chen interrupted. "A man with his resources doesn't leave paper trails unless he wants to. Everything we've found, he let us find." The phone rang, making them all jump. Thomas checked the caller ID, unknown number, international. His hand hovered over the receiver. "Dad, don't—" Sarah started, but Thomas was already picking up. "Miller residence." "Ah, Mr. Miller." Kovac's voice was smooth as aged whiskey. "I trust you've had time to consider my offer, though perhaps I should update it given your latest discovery." Thomas's blood ran cold. The map had been found less than 24 hours ago in a secured museum lab. Sheriff Cooper was already reaching for his radio. "What do you want, Mr. Kovac?" "To make you wealthy beyond imagination, of course, but more importantly, to protect you." A pause. "Tell me, Mr. Miller, have you been sleeping well? Any strange dreams since you found the pendant? Ancient voices speaking words you almost understand?" Thomas's free hand went to his father's journal, where he'd been recording his dreams. Sheriff Cooper was on the phone now, too, speaking urgently into it. "I'm sending a car to pick you up," Kovac continued. "Just you, Mr. Miller, in 1 hour. My offer is simple, $20 million for everything. The pendant, the map, and most importantly, the location of the chamber beneath your farm." Out of the corner of his eye, Thomas saw Sarah mouthing chamber to Dr. Chen. He hadn't told anyone about that part of his dreams yet. "And if I refuse, then I cannot guarantee the safety of your lovely daughter's apartment in Philadelphia. 4th floor, overlooking the park. Such dangerous wiring in those old buildings." The threat was delivered so casually it took a moment to register. When it did, Thomas felt something shift inside him. Not fear, but a deep ancient anger that seemed to rise from the land itself. 1 hour, Mr. Miller. I look forward to—" Thomas hung up. The kitchen was silent, except for the ticking of his grandmother's clock on the wall. "Dad?" Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "What did he say?" Before Thomas could answer, Sheriff Cooper's radio crackled. "Sheriff, we've got multiple vehicles approaching the farm, professional security type. They're blocking all access roads." Dr. Chen was already pulling up satellite imagery on his tablet. "They've surrounded us. This isn't a negotiation. It's a siege." Thomas walked to the window. Black SUVs were appearing on every road, forming a perimeter around his property. But his eyes were drawn to the north field, where the old oak trees swayed in a wind he couldn't feel. The earth there seemed to pulse with a strange energy, calling to something in his blood. He opened his father's journal to a blank page, wrote down the time and date, and added 7 words. "The land remembers, and so do I." "Sheriff," he said, quietly, "get everyone off my farm, now." He looked at Sarah, seeing her mother's strength in her eyes. "Honey, go with them. There are things about our family, about this land, things your mother and I should have told you long ago. Dad, go. Please." He touched the journal's worn cover. "When this is over, if I can't tell you myself, everything you need to know is in here." As they evacuated, Thomas watched Kovacs' forces tighten their circle around the farm. But he wasn't afraid anymore. 7 generations of Millers had protected this land, and now he finally understood why. The real treasure wasn't the pendant or the map. It was what they were trying to keep buried. The local historical society's archives smelled of dust and forgotten things. Thomas spread the yellowed mining maps across the reading room table, his fingers tracing the faded lines, while Earl Jenkins, the Society's elderly archivist, rummaged through more files. "Here it is," Earl wheezed, pulling out a leather portfolio. 1887 Geological Survey shows all the limestone caves under the county." He paused, squinting at Thomas. "Interesting timing. You asking about these now? That fellow with the accent was here yesterday, asking the same questions." Thomas's hands stilled on the maps. "Kovacs was here?" "Didn't give his name. But he was real interested in the section. Under your property." Earl pulled out another map, this one marked with red circles. "See these sinkholes reported in the 1880s, all of them on or near your land." The pattern of the circles matched the symbols on the ancient map perfectly. Thomas felt his pulse quicken as Earl overlaid the 2 maps on the light table. "Funny thing," Earl continued, adjusting his glasses. "Every time they tried to survey those caves properly, equipment failed. Men got sick. One team in 1923 went in and..." He trailed off. "And what? Never came out." "Not really." Earl's voice dropped to a whisper. "They found them 3 days later, wandering in your north field, babbling about lights and voices. None of them would go back in. None of them would even talk about what they saw. Thunder rumbled outside, though the morning had been clear. Thomas watched shadows move across the maps, forming patterns that seemed almost deliberate. "My grandfather used to tell stories," Earl said, pulling out a leather-bound journal, "about the original settlers here. Said they chose this spot because something was already here, something they were supposed to protect." The journal's pages were filled with cramped handwriting and crude drawings. One sketch showed the same symbol Thomas had seen on both the pendant and Kovacs' business card. They called it the Whisper. "Gate," Earl continued, "said it was a door to somewhere else, somewhere the old powers still lived." He closed the journal carefully. "Course, that's just local legend, ghost stories." But Thomas knew better. The voices in his dreams had been getting clearer. Last night he'd understood every word. "I need copies of everything," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "And Earl, if anyone else comes asking, son, I've been keeping this town's secrets for 40 years. Earl started photocopying the maps. Besides, that fellow with the accent, something about him wasn't right. Where he looked at these maps, like he wasn't studying them, he was confirming something he already knew. Back at the farm, Thomas parked near the old oak grove. Kovacs' men were still watching from a distance, but they hadn't tried to stop him from leaving or returning. They were waiting for something. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Thomas walked the pattern he'd seen in his dreams. 15 paces north from the oldest oak, 23 west, 7 south. At each point, he felt the ground vibrate slightly. Beneath his boots, the final step brought him to a patch of bare earth where nothing had ever grown. He knelt, pressing his palm against the soil. The response was immediate, a deep thrumming that resonated in his bones, calling to something in his blood that had been dormant for generations. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Dad, found something in Mum's old papers. Call immediately." But Thomas was already brushing away dirt from a stone surface that shouldn't have been there. Symbols emerged under his fingers, the same ones from the pendant, the map, and his dreams. They began to glow with a faint blue light. The earth shifted beneath him. A gap appeared in the stone, revealing rough-hewn steps descending into darkness. Ancient air rushed up from below, carrying whispers in a language that, until now, he hadn't known he could speak. Thomas took out his father's journal and added one line: "The gate remembers its guardians." Then he pulled out his flashlight and began to descend. Behind him, storm clouds gathered unnaturally fast over the farm. The time for hiding what lay beneath his land was over. Now it was time to remember why it had been hidden in the first place. Sarah's hands trembled as she held out their grandmother's letter, the paper yellow with age. "Found it hidden in Mom's old recipe box. It's addressed to you, Dad. The date—" She swallowed hard. "It's marked to be opened this exact week 20 years ago." Thomas took the letter, recognizing his mother's elegant script immediately. The envelope bore a single symbol drawn in faded ink, the same one from the pendant. "Read it," Sarah whispered. Thomas unfolded the pages carefully. "My dearest Thomas, if you're reading this, then what our family has guarded for generations has finally awakened. I prayed it wouldn't be in your lifetime, but the signs were there. The dreams have started, haven't they? Ancient voices speaking truths that feel like memories. Your father and I weren't entirely honest about our family's history. The Millers didn't simply purchase this land in 1832. We were called here, chosen. The pendant you found, yes, I know you'll find it, is more than a historical artifact. It's a key, Thomas, a key and a warning. Look in the family Bible, behind the birth records. You'll find documents that trace our line back to medieval Europe, to a brotherhood of guardians sworn to protect something powerful, something dangerous. They scattered across the world, hiding pieces of an ancient whole that was too dangerous to remain intact. Our ancestors chose this land because the earth here remembers. The soil itself keeps secrets. But now others are waking up to old knowledge. They'll come looking. A man may appear, bearing our ancient mark corrupted. Do not trust him, no matter what he offers. Remember the stories I told you about the old country. They weren't fairy tales. The symbols, the chants, I taught them to you as nursery rhymes, but they're so much more. Your blood knows the truth, even if your mind has forgotten. Sarah must know everything now. She has the gift, stronger even than yours. I've watched her since she was small, the way plants grow better under her care, the way she always knows when storms are coming. She is part of this, Thomas, whether you want her to be or not. There's more, but it must be spoken, not written. Go to the oak grove at midnight. Stand in the circle. Remember the songs I taught you. The earth will do the rest. All my love, Mom P.S. Burn this letter after reading. Some words are too dangerous to leave behind. Thomas looked up to find Sarah staring at him, tears in her eyes. "The recipe box," she said quietly. "It just called to me this morning, like it was time." "Your grandmother," a smooth voice interrupted, "was a remarkable woman." They spun to find Viktor Kovac standing in the doorway, holding their grandmother's Bible. Such detailed records your family keeps, birth dates, death dates, and so many interesting marginal notes. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Did you know your family's original name wasn't Miller? It was Muller. Before that, Molinari. Before that, well, some names are better left unspoken." "Get out." Thomas growled, stepping in front of Sarah. "I think not." Kovac opened the Bible carefully. "You see, my family has kept records too. We've waited centuries for the signs to align. The pendant, the map, the gate, all the pieces coming together." He looked up, his eyes suddenly ancient in his modern face. "Your grandmother was right about one thing. I do bear a corrupted mark. But what she didn't know was why it was corrupted." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a tattoo that made Thomas's vision blur. It was their family's symbol, but twisted, wrong, pulsing with a sickly light. "Some of us," Kovac continued, "believed the power shouldn't be hidden, that it should be used. Your ancestors called us traitors, branded us, hunted us, but we endured, we watched, we waited." The room grew darker, though it was mid-afternoon. Sarah gasped as the letter in Thomas's hands began to glow with the same blue light as the pendant. "Now, Kovac said softly. "Shall we discuss what really lies beneath your farm, or shall I show you why your grandmother was right to be afraid?" The museum's security footage played on Dr. Chen's laptop, the black and white images casting a ghostly glow in the darkened office. Thomas, Sarah, and Sheriff Cooper watched as a familiar figure moved through the research lab at 2:17 a.m. "I trusted him," Dr. Chen whispered, his face ashen. 10 years as my assistant." On screen, James Parker worked methodically, photographing their research notes, copying files from the computer, carefully examining the pendant. His movements were practiced, professional, not the actions of an opportunistic thief, but of someone who had been planning this for a long time. "Stop," Sarah said suddenly. "Go back 30 seconds. Dr. Chen reversed the footage. They watched as James held the pendant up to the light, then reached into his pocket and replaced it with something else. An identical pendant. He switched. "Them," Thomas breathed. "How long ago?" "The time stamp," Sheriff Cooper pointed out. "This was 3 days ago. Everything we've been studying since then has been a fake." Dr. Chen slumped in his chair. "No wonder the latest scans showed different results. I thought the equipment was malfunctioning, but Sarah was already pulling up more security feeds on another monitor. Here, loading dock, 2:43 a.m. That's Kovac's car." They watched as James emerged from the building, got into the sleek black vehicle, and disappeared into the night. The real pendant and all their research went with him. "Check his employment records, Sheriff," Cooper said. "I bet they're forgeries." Dr. Chen's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Degrees from Oxford and Yale, references from... These are all fake. Perfect forgeries, but fake." He looked up, his face haunted. "He didn't just infiltrate my team, he was placed here years ago, waiting for something like this." Thomas felt the weight of his grandmother's letter in his pocket. "Not waiting for something like this," he said quietly. "Waiting for exactly this." Zara's phone buzzed, a text from James. "Sorry it had to be this way, but some things are bigger than friendship. Check your email." The message arrived seconds later, containing only a video file. Dr. Chen opened it on the laptop. James's face filled the screen, the real pendant visible around his neck. "By now you've discovered the switch," he began. "I want you to understand, this isn't about money. The Kovac family has protected the true history of these artifacts for centuries, working to undo the damage your ancestors caused, Thomas." Sarah grabbed her father's arm as James continued. "That pendant you found, it's not just one key, it's the last key. For generations, your family has kept the power contained, hidden, locked away from those who could use it to change the world. But that ends now." The camera panned to show elaborate equipment set up in what looked like a cave system. Kovac stood in the background, examining papers that Thomas recognized as their research notes. "The gates were meant to be opened," James said. "The power was meant to be used. Your ancestors knew this before fear turned them into jailers instead of guardians." He smiled sadly. "The journal entries we found in your grandmother's Bible proved it. The original Brotherhood didn't hide the artifacts to protect humanity from power. They hid them to protect power from humanity." The cave behind him looked disturbingly familiar. Thomas's dreams flooded back, the underground chamber, the symbols, the voices. "We're already beneath your farm, Thomas. The sensors you set up, we've been feeding them false data for days. The security patrol, they work for us now. Everything you think you know about what's happening here is wrong." The video ended with a final shot of the pendant, its symbols glowing with an unnatural light. Sheriff Cooper was already on his radio, ordering a sweep of the farm's perimeter. Dr. Chen frantically checked their sensor data, confirming James's claim. And Sarah stood perfectly still, her eyes closed, face pale. "Dad," she whispered. "The earth, can you feel it?" He could. A deep vibration, more felt than heard, rising from somewhere far below. The power that had slept beneath his farm for generations was awakening, and they had just lost the one thing that could control it. Thomas pulled out his father's journal, adding a final note. The betrayal was always coming. They didn't infiltrate our defenses. They were inside them from the start. Above them, storm clouds gathered unnaturally fast over the farm. In the north field, the old oak trees began to sway in a wind that affected nothing else. And deep, underground, in chambers that hadn't seen light in centuries, ancient machinery was beginning to turn. Dr. Chen's hands shook as he lifted the ancient seal from its protective case. They had retreated to the museum's secure archives, where generations of classified artifacts lay hidden from public view. The seal, a heavy bronze disc covered in familiar symbols, had been catalogued simply as Item 647, Origin Unknown. "It was here all along," he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. "In our own archives, the seal of the Brotherhood of the Gate." Thomas traced the symbols with his finger, feeling the same resonance he'd experienced with the pendant. The central image showed a circle of robed figures surrounding what appeared to be a doorway. But unlike normal doors, this one opened into a space filled with strange geometries and twisted patterns that hurt the eyes to look at directly. "Marcus," Sarah said quietly, "when exactly did the museum acquire this?" Dr. Chen consulted the acquisition. "Records, 1832, donated by..." He paused, looking up at Thomas. "Donated by Edward Miller." "My great-great-grandfather," Thomas confirmed. "The first miller to settle our land." "There's more." Dr. Chen pulled out a folder of yellowed papers. "These came with the seal, but they're in a script I've never seen before. Until now." The pages were covered in the same symbols they'd found on the pendant and map, but now somehow Thomas could read them as clearly as English. "It's a warning," he said, the words coming to him as if remembered rather than translated. The gates were built in places of power, natural convergences where the boundaries between realities were thin. Sarah leaned over his shoulder, her eyes wide. "You can read this, so can you," he said. "Try." She hesitated, then touched one of the symbols. The Brotherhood was formed not to hide power, but to prevent the merging. She looked up, startled. "How did I do that?" "Because it's in your blood," a new voice said. They turned to find an elderly woman standing in the doorway, leaning on a carved wooden staff. Her security badge identified her as Dr. Elizabeth Ward, head of special collections. But Thomas had never seen her before. "I was wondering when you'd find your way here," she said, studying them with ancient eyes. "The seal has been waiting for a miller to return." "You know about this?" Dr. Chen asked. "My family has worked here since the museum's founding," she replied. "We've been watching, waiting. When James infiltrated the archaeology department, we knew the time was coming." She touched the seal, and the symbols flared briefly. "But we couldn't interfere until you discovered the truth yourselves." "The Brotherhood," Thomas said, understanding dawning. "It didn't end. It just went underground." "We adapted," Elizabeth corrected. "Museums, universities, historical societies, anywhere we could protect the old knowledge while hiding in plain sight." She turned to Sarah. "Your mother knew. She came here often, studying, preparing. She wanted to tell you, but the knowledge had to come at the right time." "And now?" Sarah asked. "Now Kovac has the pendant, which means we're nearly out of time. The gates were built with fail-safes. They need multiple keys to fully open. The pendant is one. This seal," she tapped the bronze disc, "is another. That's why Kovac hasn't succeeded yet," Thomas realized. "Even with the pendant and the map, he needs what we protect here," Elizabeth confirmed. "And he knows it. James wasn't the only sleeper agent. Right now, there are people inside this building getting closer to this room who have waited years for this moment." As if on cue, alarms began blaring throughout the museum. Dr. Chen's phone buzzed with security alerts. "Multiple breaches," he reported grimly. "They're coming," Elizabeth pressed the seal into Thomas's hands. The choice your ancestors faced is now yours. The power behind the gates isn't good or evil. It simply is. But if the boundaries between worlds fall... She was interrupted by the sound of running feet in the corridor. "Dad!" Sarah's voice was steady despite her fear. "What do we do?" Thomas felt the seal pulse in his hands, responding to his bloodline. Through the archive's high windows, he could see storm clouds gathering over the city, mirroring the ones above his farm. The very air seemed to vibrate with building power. In his mind, he heard his grandmother's voice reciting those childhood rhymes. Spells, he now knew, that had prepared him for this moment without his knowing. "We do what millers have always done," he said. "We protect." The archive doors burst open. The modern Brotherhood sanctuary lay hidden beneath the museum's sub-basement, accessed through a maintenance door that responded to Elizabeth's touch. As they hurried down ancient stone steps, Thomas clutched both the seal and his father's journal, while Sarah held a small cloth bag containing Dr. Chen's most crucial research notes. The sanctuary itself took their breath away. A vast, circular chamber lined with artifacts and illuminated by lights that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. Men and women of various ages looked up from workstations filled with both ancient texts and modern technology. Each wore a simple silver badge bearing the Brotherhood's mark. "Welcome to the true museum," Elizabeth said, leading them to a central table. "Everything above is just a cover for what we do here." A tall man with silver hair approached, his badge marking him as Professor Daniel Reeves, Senior Guardian. "The Miller bloodline returns to us at last." He gestured to the badges laid out on the table. "We've been keeping these for you." Thomas picked up one of the badges, feeling its weight. Unlike the others he'd seen, these were made of an ancient bronze, identical to the pendant's material. The symbols around their edges shifted subtly in the light. "Your grandmother helped us create these," Daniel explained. "She knew this day would come. Each badge contains a fragment of the original power. Not enough to be dangerous, but enough to help you recognize and resist what's awakening." Sarah fastened her badge with steady hands. "The woman in my dreams, the one teaching me the old words." "Your grandmother," Elizabeth confirmed. "She's been preparing you from beyond, using the connection in your blood. The dreams weren't just dreams, they were training." Suddenly, the badges on everyone's chests pulsed with blue light. Daniel rushed to a bank of monitors showing security feeds from the farm. "Kovach's people have breached the underground chamber," he reported. "They're using the pendant to activate something. Thomas, you need to see this." The footage showed James and Kovach standing before a massive stone doorway covered in glowing symbols. The pendant hung in the air before them, spinning slowly, its light growing stronger. "The gate is responding," Elizabeth said grimly, "but they still need the seal to fully open it, which means..." An explosion rocked the museum above them. Dust fell from ancient beams. "They're here," Daniel confirmed, checking his tablet. 3 teams, heavily armed. They've disabled the main security system, but our separate grid is still active." Thomas felt a deep vibration through the floor, the same resonance he'd felt on his farm. The power was building, responding to the pendant's activation. "We have protocols for this," Elizabeth announced to the room. "Initiate Sanctuary Defense Pattern Delta. Team leads, coordinate with your sectors. Remember your training." The chamber erupted into focused activity. Some members began activating strange devices along the walls, while others moved artifacts into hidden vaults. A young woman approached them with a cart of equipment. "Standard field kit," she explained, handing them each a backpack. "Communications gear, detection equipment, protective charms." The tablets are loaded with maps of both the museum's secret passages and the cave system under your farm. "How do you have maps of my caves?" Thomas asked. "Your grandmother provided them," Daniel said, "along with detailed instructions for this exact scenario. The question is, Are you ready to fully embrace your family's legacy? Once you do, there's no going back. Sarah checked her tablet, already studying the cave layouts. Mom knew. That's why she made me take those rock climbing courses in college, the survival training. She was preparing me too. Thomas opened his father's journal one last time, adding a single line. The badges awakened the blood memory. Already he could feel ancient knowledge surfacing in his mind, words of power, defensive stances, the true history of his lineage. Another explosion shook the chamber. On the monitors, Kovac's team was getting closer to their location. Time to choose, Elizabeth said quietly. Run and hide, letting others fight this battle, or stand with us and become what your family has always been meant to be. Thomas looked at Sarah, saw his own decision reflected in her eyes. Above them, footsteps pounded on ancient stone. The Brotherhood's members moved into defensive positions, their badges glowing brighter. The time for secrets was over. The time for action had come. The cave drawings glowed faintly in Thomas's flashlight beam, ancient markings that now seemed to pulse in sync with his racing heart. He and Sarah crouched in a narrow passage beneath the farm, their Brotherhood badges dimmed to avoid detection. Through their earpieces, they could hear the tactical chatter of their new allies, coordinating throughout the cave system. Team 2 reporting movement in Section C, a voice whispered. Kovac's people are spreading out, searching methodically. Sarah consulted her tablet, its screen dimmed to a bare glow. They're trying to hem us in, she murmured. See how they're moving. Classic pincer formation. Thomas nodded, remembering the military training his grandmother's dreams had imparted. The knowledge felt both foreign and familiar, like a language learned in childhood and suddenly remembered. A metallic clang echoed through the caves, followed by a deep rumbling. The very rock around them seemed to shudder. They're activating. The gate mechanisms, Elizabeth's voice crackled through their earpieces. Without the seal, it's unstable. The whole system could collapse. Negative contact in Section D, another voice reported. Wait, energy signatures spiking in the central chamber. Something's happening. The rumbling intensified. Small stones clattered down from the passage ceiling. Sarah grabbed Thomas's arm, pointing to the cave drawings. The ancient markings were beginning to move, shifting and flowing like liquid. Metal, Dad, look. She traced a pattern with her finger, careful not to touch the energized markings. These aren't just drawings. They're a map of the gate network, and they're changing. Thomas studied the flowing symbols, his enhanced understanding revealing their meaning. The gates are connected. What Kovac's doing here is affecting all of them. All teams, fall back. Daniel's urgent voice filled their earpieces. Power surge. Detected in... Static cut him off. The passage floor cracked, blue light seeping through like glowing veins. Sarah's tablet sparked and went dark. In the distance they heard shouts and the sound of running feet. This way, Thomas whispered, leading them deeper into the caves. His badge thrummed against his chest, responding to the surging energy. Each intersection they passed contained more animated cave drawings, their shifting patterns revealing glimpses of other places, other realities pressing against the thinning barriers. They rounded a corner and nearly collided with James, his own badge glowing with a sickly red light. Thomas, Sarah, thank God. His voice seemed genuine, his face etched with concern. The containment field is failing. Kovac has lost control. We need the seal, or everything collapses. Sarah's badge flared. You're lying, she said quietly. The seal's not for containing anything. It's the final key. James's expression hardened. Always the quick study, Sarah, just like your grandmother. He pulled a gun from his jacket. The seal, now! A burst of automatic weapons fire filled the passage. James dove for cover as Brotherhood agents repelled from a higher tunnel. Sarah pulled Thomas into a side passage as the firefight erupted behind them. The central chamber, she shouted over the chaos. We have to get there before the cave floor gave way beneath them. They fell through darkness, split by flashes of blue light, landing hard on a lower level. Thomas helped Sarah up, both of them bruised but intact. Then they saw where they were. The central chamber stretched above them like a cathedral, its walls covered in pulsing symbols. The pendant hung suspended in the air before the massive gate, which now rippled like the surface of a pond. Kovac stood before it, arms raised, chanting in the ancient tongue. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said without turning. "The power your ancestors feared to use, the doorway they tried to keep closed." Now he turned, his eyes glowing with an inner light. "Did they tell you what's on the other side? What really created these gates? Step away from the gate, Victor." Elizabeth's voice rang out as she and Daniel emerged from another passage, their badges blazing. "Ah, the old guard arrives," Kovac smiled. "Come to protect your precious boundaries, to keep humanity in its small, safe cage." The gate's surface rippled more violently. Through its shifting surface, Thomas caught glimpses of impossible geometries, of worlds that shouldn't exist. The power built around them like a gathering storm. "Now," Kovac said softly, "let me show you what your ancestors were really afraid of." He thrust the pendant toward the gate. Reality itself seemed to scream. The ancient altar rose from the chamber floor like a twisted tree of stone and metal, its surface etched with symbols that moved and breathed in the fluctuating light. Around it, 7 pillars formed a perfect circle, each one thrumming with power that made Thomas's teeth ache. The Brotherhood's badges pulsed in response, creating a complex rhythm of light and energy. "The heart of the gate network," Elizabeth breathed, her voice filled with awe and fear. "No one has seen this chamber activated in centuries." Kovac stood at the altar, the pendant floating before him, its light now a harsh purple that cast strange shadows. The gate behind him had become a writhing mass of geometric patterns that seemed to extend infinitely in impossible directions. "Your ancestors built this chamber," Kovac said, his voice distorted by power. "But they didn't create it. They found it, just as those before them found it. The gates were here long before humanity, waiting to be opened." Sarah's badge suddenly flared bright blue. She gasped, her eyes going wide. "The dreams! I understand now. This isn't just a doorway." She pointed to the moving symbols on the altar. "It's a lock, designed to keep something out." Thomas felt the truth of her words resonate in his blood. The knowledge his grandmother had planted in his dreams crystallized into understanding. "The Brotherhood wasn't formed to protect power," he said. "It was formed to protect our reality. From what lies beyond the gates." "Lies," Kovac snarled. "They were cowards, afraid of true power. The beings beyond the gates have so much to teach us, to show us." "They would destroy us," Elizabeth cut in. "Not out of malice, but simply because our reality is incompatible with theirs, like trying to mix matter and antimatter." The chamber shuddered. Cracks appeared in the pillars, leaking the same purple light that surrounded the pendant. Through the gate's surface, Thomas caught glimpses of vast shapes, moving, of geometries that shouldn't exist, of colors that had no names. "Dad," Sarah whispered, "the altar. Look at the patterns." Thomas saw it too. The moving symbols were forming a sequence, one he recognized from his grandmother's teachings, a ritual of sealing, not opening. The badges weren't just identification, they were keys to an ancient lock. Kovac must have realized it too. He reached for the pendant, but the power had grown too strong. It hung in the air, caught between his will and the altar's pull. "The seal!" Elizabeth shouted over the rising electromagnetic whine. "It has to be freely given, placed by a miller's. A hand. That's why they could never force it from your family." Thomas felt the weight of the seal in his pocket, its heat matching his badge's pulse. 7 pillars, 7 original families of the Brotherhood. The badges they wore weren't copies of the original. They were fragments of it, passed down through bloodlines, waiting to be reunited. "If that gate fully opens," Daniel warned, checking readings on a device that sparked and sizzled, "the barrier between realities will collapse. Not just here, everywhere. Every gate in the network will fail. The chamber's floor cracked, purple, light seeping up like burning veins. The air itself seemed to be tearing, showing glimpses of other places, other times, other dimensions that hurt the mind to perceive. Sarah grabbed Thomas's arm, her voice urgent but steady. "Dad, I know what we have to do. The dreams weren't just showing me the past, they were showing me this moment. Why our family has guarded this land for so long." Thomas met her eyes and saw generations of knowledge reflected there. His grandmother's teachings, his mother's preparation, all leading to this moment. He touched the seal in his pocket, feeling it respond to his bloodline's call. "The ritual requires 7, Kovac said, his voice almost pleading now as the power began to slip from his control. "You don't have enough Brotherhood members here to seal it." Elizabeth stepped forward, her badge brightening. 1. Daniel moved to another pillar. 2. 2 more Brotherhood members emerged from the shadows. 3. 4. Sarah took her position. 5. Thomas stood before the 6th pillar. 6. "You're still 1 short," Kovac laughed, though fear edged his voice. "The gate will—" A new figure stepped into the chamber, their badge glowing with a light that outshone all others. "Mom," Sarah whispered. The Guardian's manual materialized in Catherine Miller's hands, its pages glowing with the same ethereal light that seemed to emanate from her entire being. Sarah's mother, or what appeared to be her mother, stood at the 7th pillar, more present than any ghost but somehow less solid than the living. "Mom," Sarah's voice cracked. "How—" "The sealing ritual requires 7 bloodlines," Catherine said, her voice carrying ethereal harmonics. "When I knew my time was growing short, I bound part of myself to my badge, waiting for this moment." She opened the manual, its ancient pages floating in the air before them. "We have only minutes before the barrier fails completely." Thomas stared at his wife, his heart aching. "You knew all this time?" "I knew many things, my love. Why do you think I made sure Sarah learned the old languages? Why I insisted you keep reading from your father's journal every night?" Catherine's form flickered as another surge of power shook the chamber. "But there's no time for explanations now. The ritual must be completed." The manual's pages turned by themselves, stopping at a section covered in shifting symbols. Like the cave drawings, these moved and flowed, but with purpose and pattern. "The ritual has 3 parts, Catherine explained rapidly. "First, the badges must be unified, their power joined through the bloodlines. Then the seal must be placed upon the altar at the exact moment the pendant's energy peaks. Finally, the words of sealing must be spoken by all 7 in perfect harmony." Elizabeth stepped forward. "The badges are fragments of the original seal, separated to prevent any one family from accessing the full power. Even to ensure that sealing the gate would always require cooperation," Daniel added. "No single bloodline could do it alone." Kovac laughed, a harsh sound that echoed unnaturally. "You really think you can complete a ritual that hasn't been performed? In centuries? The timing must be perfect. One mistake and the power backlash will destroy you all." "That's why the manual was created," Catherine said. Her form stabilized as she touched the pages. "Everything we need to know is here, preserved. Through generations. The positions, the words, the timing." Thomas studied the diagrams forming in the air around them. 7 points of power, connected by lines of force that formed a complex geometric pattern. The manual showed how the energy should flow, how each bloodline's unique resonance contributed to the whole. "Here," Catherine pointed to a sequence of symbols. "Each badge holder must channel their family's specific tone. Sarah, yours is the note of binding. Thomas, yours is the note of sealing. Together, they form the core of the ritual." Sarah's hands moved instinctively, tracing patterns in the air that left trails of blue light. "Like in my dreams, you were teaching me these movements." "Yes. And now?" Catherine's warning was cut off by a massive surge of power. The gate's surface bulged, inward geometric patterns writhing. Through the distortion, massive shapes moved closer, pressing against the thinning barrier between worlds. The pendant's purple light pulsed faster, matching the increasingly unstable rhythm of reality itself. "Take your positions," Catherine commanded. "Elizabeth North Point, Daniel Northwest, Marcus and Claire West and Southwest, Sarah South, Thomas Southeast. I'll take the eastern point. The pattern must be perfect." They moved to their assigned pillars, badges pulsing in sync. Thomas felt the seal grow warmer in his pocket as Kovac watched helplessly, his control over the pendant now completely gone. "The words," Catherine said, the manual floating before her. "Read them, feel them. They're not just sounds. They're keys to unlock your badge's full power." Thomas looked at the flowing text and found he could read it instinctively. Generations of blood memory surfacing. Sarah too was mouthing the words, her badge growing brighter. "When the pendant's light reaches its peak," Catherine continued, her form flickering as the power surged again, "we'll have exactly 7 seconds to complete the ritual. If we fail..." Another surge rocked the chamber. Through the gate, something vast and geometrically impossible began to push through, its very presence causing reality to warp and bend. The time for preparation was over. The final battle for reality itself was about to begin. The activation key hung suspended between the pendant and the gate, its crystalline surface refracting purple and blue energies in impossible patterns. Catherine had pulled it from the manual. Itself, a physical manifestation of the book's power, the final component needed to complete the sealing. Reality buckled around them as the 7 members of the Brotherhood stood at their pillars. The chamber itself seemed to pulse like a massive heart, ancient machinery groaning beneath the stone floor. Through the gate's writhing surface, the shapes were becoming clearer, vast geometric forms that hurt the mind to perceive, extending in directions that shouldn't exist. "The pendant's energy is approaching critical," Daniel shouted, his monitoring device sparking violently. 2 minutes until peak!" Kovac lunged for the floating activation key, but an invisible barrier held him back. The combined power of the 7 badges had created a containment field, trapping him between the pillars with the very forces he had tried to control. "You fools," he snarled, his voice distorting. "Do you know what you're giving up? The beings beyond the gate can reshape reality itself. They can give us anything, everything. They would give us nothing." Catherine's ethereal voice rang out. "Because to them we are nothing. Our universe is as incomprehensible to them as they are to us." The chamber shuddered. Cracks spread across the ceiling, leaking purple light. Sarah's badge pulse suddenly quickened. "Dad," she called out, "something's wrong. The resonance pattern, it's not stabilizing." Thomas felt it too. The 7 badges were struggling to synchronize, their energies clashing instead of harmonizing. The manual's pages fluttered wildly as Catherine consulted them. "The bloodlines," she said urgently, "they've changed over generations. The original resonance frequencies, we need to adjust for the drift." Another surge rocked the chamber. The gate's surface bulged inward like a membrane about to burst. Through it, one of the geometric beings reached out with an appendage that existed in more dimensions than the human mind could process. 1 minute! Daniel's warning was nearly drowned out by the rising electromagnetic howl. Thomas looked at his badge, then at Sarah's, seeing the subtle differences in their light patterns. 7 generations of Millers had subtly altered the family's connection to the power. The same must be true for all the bloodlines. "The key," he said suddenly, "it's not just for activation, it's for calibration." "Mom, the manual said the key attunes to blood, right?" Catherine's eyes widened. Yes. Sarah, your tone is closest to the original Miller resonance. You need to use the key." "But the ritual," Sarah began, "will fail anyway if we don't." "Calibrate properly," Elizabeth cut in. "Do it!" Sarah stepped away from her pillar. Immediately the containment field weakened. Kovac saw his chance and dove for the key. "Sarah!" Thomas moved without thinking, leaving his own pillar. His badge flared as he tackled Kovac, both of them crashing to the ground. The key spun through the air. Catherine's spectral form reached out, somehow managing to catch the key and throw it to Sarah. 30 seconds, Daniel shouted. Sarah grasped the key with both hands. Its crystal surface turned deep blue, resonating with her badge. A pure note rang out, rising above the chaos. "The pillars!" Catherine commanded. "Everyone, match her tone!" One by one, they found the new resonance. Thomas felt his badge adjust, its light shifting to match Sarah's. Around the chamber, the other badges followed suit. 10 seconds. Kovac had begun laughing, a sound that echoed wrongly in the charged air. Even if you seal it, you can't undo what's begun. The barriers are weakening everywhere. Other gates will open. 5 seconds. Thomas met his wife's eyes across the chamber, seeing in her spectral form all the love and secrets and sacrifice of their years together. She nodded once. Now. Sarah slammed the key into the altar's central socket. Thomas placed the seal. 7 voices rang out in perfect harmony, speaking words that reshaped reality itself. The gate exploded with light, and everything changed. The pendant blazed with impossible light as the ritual reached its crescendo. Reality itself seemed to bend around it, warping and twisting as the 7 voices completed the ancient sealing words. The activation key pulsed in sync with their badges, each beat sending waves of blue energy through the chamber's geometric patterns. Thomas felt power surge through him, raw and ancient, connecting him to every miller who had ever stood guard. Over the gates, through that connection, he sensed more. Other bloodlines, other gates, a vast network of seals and guardians stretching across the world. Each gate had its own guardians, its own seal, all of them now awakening in response to this moment. Sarah's voice rose above the others, carrying the core harmony that bound their powers together. The key responded to her, its crystal structure, reorganizing itself to match her blood's resonance. This was why Kovac's attempts had failed. The gates didn't just require the right artifacts, but the right bloodlines, working in willing concert. "The barrier is stabilizing," Daniel called, out his monitoring device somehow still functioning. The dimensional breach is beginning to, a massive tendril of geometric impossibility smashed through the gate's surface, shattering the air itself. Reality screamed as shapes that shouldn't exist pushed against the weakened barriers between. "Worlds, hold the pattern." Catherine's spectral form flared brighter. "The seal isn't complete yet." Kovac had begun laughing again, but the sound was wrong. Too many harmonics, too many dimensions of sound. His body contorted as something reached through the gate and into him. "Did you think," he said, his voice overlaid with others, "that we hadn't prepared for this? That we hadn't changed your precious bloodlines over centuries of careful manipulation?" His flesh rippled, geometric patterns emerging beneath his skin. The badge he'd stolen from the Brotherhood centuries ago burst into purple flame on his chest. "Dad," Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "The manual. Look at the final page." Thomas saw it through their shared blood connection, a last resort protocol hidden in the manual's shifting text. The original Brotherhood had known this might happen, had prepared for the possibility of corrupted bloodlines. "The pendants," he shouted to the others, "they're not just keys, they're conduits. Focus your power through Sarah." Understanding flashed through the Brotherhood. Their badges flared as they redirected their energy, using Sarah's pure bloodline as a focal point. The key in the altar resonated with her, creating a feedback loop of power. Kovac screamed as the being trying to possess him was caught between dimensions. Through the gate, the geometric entities began retreating, pushing back from the strengthening barrier. "Sarah," Catherine called out, her form beginning to fade. "The final seal requires a sacrifice, a willing guardian to maintain it permanently." "Mom, no. It was always going to be this way, sweetheart. Why do you think I bound myself to the badge instead of passing on? I've been preparing for this moment for years." Thomas reached out to his wife, his heart breaking. "Catherine, I'll always be here," she said softly. "In the land, in the seal, in our daughter's blood. The gates will have their guardian, and our family will have its future." Catherine's spectral form dissolved into pure light, flowing into the seal. The manual's pages turned on their own, revealing one final inscription that wrote itself in shimmering text. "The blood remembers, the land endures, the gates are sealed." The pendant flared one final time, then shattered into 7 pieces, each flying to one of the Brotherhood members. The fragments transformed as they landed, becoming new badges of office, marked with both their family sigils and Catherine's sacrificial seal. As the light faded, they saw that Kovac was gone, leaving only his corrupted badge behind. The gate had become a solid wall of stone, covered in symbols that no longer moved, and in the center of the altar, the activation key had transformed into a crystalline flower, a permanent marker of Catherine's eternal guardianship. Sarah touched her. "New badge, tears falling. I can feel her. In the seal, in the land. She's really still here." Thomas placed his hand over hers. Through their shared connection to the power, they felt Catherine's love, as eternal now as the gates she helped seal. The other Brotherhood members bowed their heads in respect, their badges pulsing softly with renewed purpose. The ancient power had been contained, but not ended. It would need constant vigilance, new generations of guardians. But now they understood the truth that their ancestors had known. The greatest power wasn't in opening gates, but in choosing to keep them closed. The new guardian's ring gleamed on Sarah's finger as she stood in the north field, watching the sunrise. The ring, forged from her mother's transformed badge, was both a symbol of office and a working tool, allowing her to sense the gate's condition and the strength of its seals. Thomas wore a matching ring, their dual guardianship reflecting the Miller family's enhanced role in the Brotherhood. 3 months had passed since the confrontation in the chamber. The farm looked the same on the surface, but everything had changed. The old oak trees now stood as silent sentinels, their roots extending deep into the earth, where the sealed gate lay quiet but not dormant. The land itself felt different, more aware, more alive with the essence of Catherine's eternal vigil. "The perimeter sensors are all updated," Dr. Chen reported, approaching with his tablet. The Brotherhood had merged modern technology with ancient methods, creating a sophisticated monitoring system. "The new badges are working perfectly. We can track any dimensional disturbances within a 100-mile radius." Sarah nodded, touching her ring. Mom would have loved seeing all this, the old and new working together just like she planned. "She sees it," Thomas said quietly. "Every time the ring pulses, every time the seals strengthen, that's her still protecting us all." The Brotherhood had changed too. The museum's secret sanctuary now served as their primary headquarters, with similar facilities being established at other gate locations worldwide. Elizabeth coordinated the global network from there, while Daniel trained new recruits from the surviving bloodlines. "Latest report from the European branch," Dr. Chen continued. "They've located 3 more corrupted badges. Pre-Kovac era, but still dangerous. Teams are moving to secure them. The corrupted badges were their biggest concern now. Over centuries, dozens had been stolen or compromised, each one a potential threat to the dimensional barriers. But with their new understanding and enhanced powers, the Brotherhood was better equipped than ever to handle such threats." Sarah reached down and touched the soil, feeling the deep resonance of the sealed gate. Through her blood connection, amplified by her mother's sacrifice, she could sense the ancient machinery far below, working in perfect harmony with the natural energy of the land. "The seasonal readings are ready for the journal," she said, straightening up. Like her father and grandmother before her, she maintained the family record, though now she understood why tracking the land's patterns had always been so important. Thomas pulled out his father's journal. its pages now filled with both agricultural notes and mystical observations. The Brotherhood had discovered that similar journals existed for each gate location, disguised as ordinary farming records, but actually documenting centuries of supernatural activity. "Your mother would be proud," he said, watching Sarah make her entries. "You've mastered in months what took most guardians years to learn." She made sure I would be ready. Sarah closed the journal carefully. All those childhood lessons, the strange games she invented. She was training me all along, training both of us, really. A soft chime came from their rings. Catherine's way of acknowledging when they spoke of her. The sound brought comfort now rather than pain, a reminder that she remained present in her own way. Dr. Chen's tablet beeped. "Time for the daily status meeting. Elizabeth has updates from the Asian sanctuaries." They walked back toward the farmhouse, which now concealed a state-of-the-art command center in its renovated basement. The old family home had become a perfect symbol of their new reality, traditional on the outside, but incorporating powerful new additions that strengthened its original purpose. "You know," Sarah said, pausing at the door, "when you first found that pendant, I thought we were just dealing with valuable artifacts. Now we're interdimensional guardians, continuing a 1,000-year-old mission." Thomas smiled, touching his ring. "And farming. Don't forget the farming." "Of course, Mom always said our connection to the land was important." Sarah looked out over the fields, where new crops grew stronger than ever, nourished by the balanced energies of the sealed gate. "I finally understand why." Their rings pulsed in agreement as they went inside, ready to continue the work of generations. The gates were secure, the Brotherhood was strong, and the Miller family's legacy was assured. Catherine's sacrifice had given them a future worth protecting. The family chronicle lay open on the kitchen table, its leather cover worn smooth by generations of Miller hands. Sarah sat before it, carefully transcribing the events of the past 6 months, while Thomas prepared coffee. The morning sun streamed through windows that overlooked fields now ripening toward harvest, the crops growing more abundantly than ever. Under the balanced energy of the sealed gate, "Uncle James called," Sarah said, dipping her pen in ink. "Some traditions the Brotherhood maintained for important records. They've secured the Singapore gate. That's the last of the major sites." Thomas set down their coffee mugs, his ring pulsing softly. "And the corrupted badges?" "All but 2 recovered. Elizabeth thinks they're somewhere in Eastern Europe, probably hidden away by Kovach's old allies." She touched her own ring, feeling the familiar resonance of her mother's presence in its crystalline structure. "We'll find them." The chronicles. Pages held the true history of their family now, no longer hidden in metaphor and farming records. Future generations would know exactly what they were inheriting, would understand the weight and privilege of their bloodline's duty. A gentle chime drew their attention to the window. Near the old oak grove, a shimmer of blue light briefly illuminated the morning air, Catherine's way of greeting them. These manifestations had grown more frequent as Sarah's powers developed, her connection to her mother's guardian spirit strengthening with each passing day. "The new initiates arrive next week," Thomas said, sipping his coffee. "Daniel says this is the largest group of bloodline descendants we've ever found at once." Sarah nodded, adding this detail to the chronicle. The Brotherhood had grown significantly since the confrontation at the gate, as families who had lost touch with their heritage were rediscovered and awakened to their true purpose. "Mom knew this would happen," she said softly. "That's why she left so many contingency plans, so many hidden caches of knowledge. She saw that sealing the gate wouldn't be an end, but a beginning. The kitchen filled with the scent of roses, Catherine's favorite flower, as the morning light caught Sarah's ring. Through their shared connection to the power, father and daughter felt her presence, her love, her continuing guidance. Thomas opened his father's journal, now retired from daily use but still precious. "I found something yesterday," he said, turning to a page near the beginning. "Look at the date." Sarah leaned over. The entry was from 30 years ago, written in her grandmother's hand. Catherine came today. The moment I saw her, I knew she was the one, not just for Thomas, but for our legacy. The land sang when she walked on it. Our future is assured. She was chosen, Sarah whispered. Or rather, she chose us, knowing everything it would mean, and gave us the greatest gift anyone could. Thomas closed the journal gently. A purpose worthy of our power. The Brotherhood's morning briefing would begin soon. There were gates to monitor, initiates to train, corrupted badges to track down. The work of generations continued, but now in the light of full knowledge and purpose. Sarah made her final entry in the Chronicle, recording not just events but feelings, hopes and understandings for those who would follow. The Miller bloodline would continue its vigilance, strengthened by Catherine's sacrifice and enlightened by her wisdom. Outside, the old oak trees swayed in a wind that touched nothing else, the earth itself acknowledging the power of family, duty, and willing sacrifice. The gate below remained sealed but not silent, its energy transformed from a potential threat into a source of strength and life. Thomas and Sarah finished their coffee and rose, ready for another day of protecting the boundaries between worlds. Their rings pulsed in unison as Catherine's presence surrounded them one last time, reminding them that love, like power, could transcend even the boundaries between life and death. The Chronicle's final words glowed briefly as Sarah closed it. Written in ink that shimmered with more than just morning light, the land remembers, the blood endures, and love, the greatest power of all, keeps eternal watch.